Alright, let's have a little question and answer session for just have a few minutes now. Okay, Claire at the back. Is there a mic? Is there a roving mic or anything?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. I'm Claire from Invisible, Visible and Invisible Disabilities. And I know tonight's launch did have an anti-war theme, but just wanted to say that however badly the disabled veterans are treated, that as disabled people we have to think of the people in Afghanistan, Iraq, Palestine and other places who don't have access to medical treatment for rehab, don't have welfare and are really struggling, and how the communities have been devastated. And when you have bombing from the air, the proportion of disability of the service people is small compared to the civilian casualties. And I know, like, people might know Ali Abbas from Iraq, who was brought over by Zafar Khan from the Limbless Association, and Zafar Khan described, this is going back a while, how the infrastructure, the rehab centres, supplies and everything else was all disrupted in Iraq by war, and how the authorities were demanding to know how many people were affected before they would put any services in place. And of course the counting was impossible because all that infrastructure had been destroyed. So, you know, in our activism as disabled people, we have to highlight the civilian casualties and how the military budgets that they find are, you know, many times more than the so-called cost that we are to society. You know, that we demand the military budget.
Thanks for that, Claire. Pat. Pat and then Rod. Pat first, Rod and then Dave.
Good evening, Pat from UCU. I just wanted to pick up the last speaker about counting is impossible. It is totally impossible to count the devastation that's taken place with disabled people. Totally impossible because the government has fragmented every single place in our society. It's taken the health service apart, it's taken the schools apart, it's taken the colleges apart, so we have no way of knowing the devastation of what's happening to disabled people. So I think that that is the major thing that we need to fight against, the actual disenfranchisement of disabled people.
Thanks, Pat. Rod, what in there?
Yeah, so Rod Exploric, UCG members, disabled members standing committee, and also member of Disabled People Against Cuts like Pala. Am I getting too much feedback? Just in case it's painful for anyone. I just really wanted to draw something else out really from looking back 100 years ago, because 100 years ago when the war started, there was all unanimous political support across all the mainstream political parties for the slaughter which ensued. And that's exactly what has occurred 100 years later with the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The difference is that the wars 100 years ago that ended in revolution, actually there are many parallels with the situation today. Because if you look at the armed forces today, the armed support for war and the armed forces today in Britain and America, for example, and I see, you know, soldiers as victims of the war as much often as the people who they kill and fight against. I think that the point of the matter is that this government has absolutely no care whatsoever for the people that do the fighting and dying and the killing for them, and that therefore it's important for us to reach out in the disability movement with people who are disabled veterans and make common cause with them and drawing attention to the fact that these wars are all about making the rich richer, just like the war for oil in Iraq and Afghanistan and so on. Just like the war in Oh What a Lovely War, which the speaker used as a film. Again, the centrepiece of that brilliant work of art, both in the cinema and in the theatre, was that the war was all about the warmongers, the arms companies, getting richer and richer at our expense. So every time you look at the war, there is absolutely a reason why we're here in a trade union office talking about this, and that's because we need the trade union movement's power and strength to unite us in making common cause against these wars. Because the thing about Iraq and Afghanistan today, and I'll finish on this, Sean, is that there is an international movement against war today on a huge scale. So we shouldn't get too depressed when we look at the sudden surge of support for the wars in Iraq and Syria at the moment, because if you think back to 100 years ago how these wars ended with great hopes for the future and social change, then again that could be the basis of our opposition to the wars in the here and now and the hopes for social future we're fighting for.
Thanks, Rod.
My name is Dave Allen from the Unite Disabled Members Committee, and it was very interesting, Richard's talk. After the First World War, it was the Weimar social democratic and socialist government that took very positive actions in support of the disabled veterans. And after the Second World War, it was the socialist government in the UK that took very positive action in support of disabled veterans and disabled people. And what I want is to ask a question. That the current political framework in the Western world is neoliberalism that rejects all of that, looking after disabled veterans, disabled people, the poorest people in society. That argument has been lost. How do we get that back? Because it's only that kind of positive, in my view, socialist and social democratic government that will take care of disabled people, whether the veterans or disabled people, other aspects of life, and the poorest and the people who need support in society. How do we do it?
Thanks, Dave. Well, I'll now ask the speakers if any of them want to come in and respond to those 4 points. Thank you. Is there anybody? Richard?
Yeah, I'll have a go at it. Thanks. I wanted to make 2 points, really. The first is that I think from the First World War onwards, we've seen a change in war. Since the end of the Second World War, there have been 232 wars fought. And in each of those, more civilians have been killed than members of the services. That isn't to deny the deaths of the services and the disablement that's gone on, but for each person who is either disabled or killed, there are 10 times as many civilians who are killed. And that is what was new from the beginning in the First World War onwards. We moved away from this idea of combatants really being the ones that fought to total war, and certainly in the Second World War, 50 million people were dead as a result of it, and many more injured. And what we see now is new forms of war, where war is against all women in the side. So mass rape was always seen as something as the spoils of war, but rape is now used as a weapon of war in many of the wars across Africa. The children are maimed and attacked, and this is a new barbarity that really started with the First World War, and it's almost as if we've become immune to the effects of our inhumanity to each other. And it seems to me, to answer the second question, Dave's question, we have to keep protesting and keep showing that we are not, as disabled people, from a different planet, but we are anybody, who could be anybody, because all people, if they live a long time, are likely to experience disablement, and are likely to then realise that perhaps they shouldn't have taken the attitude that they did towards disabled people when they were non-disabled people. We secondly have to say that as human rights, and we're going to have a battle on our hands, if people believe in disabled people's fair rights and equal rights, I cannot see how we can actually support the parties that want us to leave Europe or the parties that want to destroy human rights and equality. Because those are the things that we will be fighting for in the next general election. And therefore these big issues, we need to make other people realise that that is what is at stake. And if those forces which are already arguing about this win, then we will have the last vestiges of the safety net that is still there for many people taken away completely. And therefore it will be worse for people. And in the end we have to argue that it is about the majority of people in a democracy having what is reasonable for their life, rather than a tiny minority who run everything for their own benefits. And so I think we have to find common cause with all those other people who are arguing the same thing, and there are many now in the new movements that have come up, but they don't have much of an influence in Parliament and elections. So we have to try and bring those voices into this political process, which they did in Scotland in a very interesting way during the referendum. Many, many new layers of people got involved, and we have to now say this is important what's going to happen to the youth, to other people who don't think it matters. It matters. It matters to the future lives of everybody who lives in this country, and therefore the future of everybody in the world.
Hello. Could I just reply to the last gentleman who spoke, saying that he wanted to know how we were going to reverse what's going on now? If you don't stop the dominating power of the Tory press, we will never reverse it. Non-disabled people get 90% of their information from the national press, and most of them get it from the tabloids. As long as you're going to have tabloids with huge banner headlines saying 75% of all disabled people don't need the benefit, you're in serious trouble. This is a corrupt government, and they have got the media in control. They now control BBC News, and they dominate the national press. Until you can control some part of the media and get some part of the press that will tell the truth, and not what the Tory government wants the British people to believe, you're in serious trouble. Because you are not going to reverse it unless you get control of this press.
I'll be calling on to respond, and then we'll stop this part.
I think it's not just about the media that we need to look at, but we need to take the fight to the government any which way we can. So that's in the courts, that's out on the streets. And here I am in Unite Resistant in the Unite Union calendar holding up a bus. Right? This is the direct action that we now need to take, because we're in a fight against the loss of human rights and even the right to protest, because the government want to make sure that we don't have a voice. Even on social media they take down posts and what have you, and social media is a prolific way of getting the voice out there. So I say to all of you, we have a voice, we have a story, we have experiences, and we say to this government, not in our name, because we're going to fight back and we're going to kick some serious ass. So I think it's about time we started thinking like that, because we have a proud history of resistance and fighting back, and it's about time that we realised that and started fighting back some more. So who's with me on that one?